Hello everybody, my name is Daniel Fernandez Picó from the University of Alicante. I am a member of the research group TALIS, Transhistorical Anglophone Literary Studies, and I'm going to speak today about Haunted Sovereignty, the cinematic adaptations of Hamlet and political power in the 21st century. Hamlet has often been interpreted as Shakespeare's most searching exploration of hesitation. Such an approach remains indispensable, but it does not exhaust the play's critical power. Shakespeare's tragedy is also a political drama in which authority is founded and performed under conditions of deep instability. The Danish court is not simply the backdrop to a family crisis. It is a damaged political order presided over by a monarch whose accession is shadowed by suspicion and whose legitimacy depends upon narrative management, whose public language of continuity conceals the violence on which that continuity rests. Read from this perspective, Hamlet becomes a drama of haunted sovereignty, a work in which institutions appear durable even as the truth they suppress repeatedly returns to unsettle them. This political reading gains additional force when placed in relation to the Gothic tradition. Critics have long noted that Shakespeare, and Hamlet in particular, occupies a foundational place in the genealogy of Gothic writing. Or as Walpole's acknowledgment of Shakespeare in the preface to the second edition of The Castle of Otranto is only the most visible marker of a longer cultural continuity. As Hogel observes, the Gothic is deeply indebted to Shakespeare, and it returns to Hamlet because the play offers a repertoire of spectrality and illegitimacy especially suited to later Gothic forms. Drakakis and Townshend, likewise, place Shakespeare at the center of a literary formation in which authority is continually imagined through anxiety and repression. Hamlet does not merely anticipate Gothic motives, it dramatizes the political logic that Gothic narrative would later codify with remarkable persistence. The relevance of that logic to the 21st century is not metaphorical in any superficial sense. Contemporary states are not hereditary courts, and democratic systems cannot be reduced to dynastic succession. Yet modern politics continues to depend on legitimacy and the management of appearances. Recent democratic diagnostics have repeatedly underscored this fertility. Freedom House reports that global freedom declined for the 19th consecutive year in 2024, with 60 countries registering deterioration and only 34 showing improvement. The Vitem Institute, meanwhile, notes that mobilization for democracy increased in 11 countries, revealing not only autocratizing but also social resistance to it. The OECD has likewise warned that disinformation jeopardizes the implementation of public policy and erodes trust in democratic institutions, while the United Nations has elevated information integrity to the status of an urgent global concern. Taken together, these developments illuminate the contemporary significance of Hamlet. The play remains politically resonant because it exposes the moment at which authority survives only by controlling appearances, while truth itself becomes unstable. Methodologically, the paper combines close reading with comparative film analysis and contextual political interpretation. It first draws on Shakespeare criticism and Gothic studies to establish Hamlet as a drama of haunted sovereignty. It then turns to Laurence Olivier's Hamlet, 1948, and Kenneth Branagh's Hamlet, shot in 1996, in order to examine how cinematic form reframes the play's political logic. The comparison is especially productive because the two films do not simply adapt the same source, they visualize different modes of authority. Olivier renders crisis through opacity, while Branagh stages it through a spectacle, visibility, and monumental performance. The final analytical step consists in placing those cinematic configurations alongside contemporary debates on democratic erosion, political deception, and the contested uses of memory. This does not entail forcing direct equivalences between Elsinore and the modern state. Rather, it allows the paper to identify recurring structures through which power legitimizes itself, suppresses its origins, and confronts the return of what it would prefer to forget. From its opening exchange, "Who's there?", Hamlet presents politics as a crisis of uncertain identification. The question establishes a state in which authority and recognition are already unstable. It is there that the Gothic dimension becomes especially illuminating. Gothic narrative repeatedly returns to ruined lineages, violated inheritances, and hidden crimes within apparently settled institutions. Hamlet anticipates this grammar with extraordinary concentration. The state is haunted because injustice has not been resolved, but displaced. What is repressed, therefore, returns in forms that disturb both epistemology and authority. The place's political world is structurally spectral. It cannot secure legitimacy because the violence that founded it remains active beneath its public forms. This also helps explain why Hamlet speaks with renewed urgency to the present. Contemporary political crises often unfold not through the immediate collapse of institutions, but through the growing discrepancy between constitutional form and public trust. The contemporary relevance of the play is intensified by its relationship to violence and historical memory. Modern conflicts, such as those in Ukraine and Gaza, have exposed, in different ways, how war, sovereignty, and public narrative remain deeply entangled. Likewise, the attack on the United States Capitol on January 6, 2021, revealed the extent to which democratic legitimacy can be destabilized when competing narratives of truth are mobilized against institutional procedures. Such examples do not collapse historical differences between Shakespeare's Denmark and the contemporary international order. They do, however, clarify the persistence of a shared problem. Authority becomes fragile when it can no longer secure a credible relationship between power, truth, and historical responsibility. Laurence Olivier's Hamlet translates the crisis of legitimacy into a visual language of shadow. The film's Elsinore is monumental, yet hollow. Olivier compresses the play's political dimensions while intensifying mood, subjectivity, and spatial anxiety. Yet, this apparent reduction of politics is, in fact, another way of staging it. In Olivier's film, politics is not absent. It is interiorized into architecture, atmosphere, and the very texture of perception. If Olivier imagines illegitimate authority and interiorized and obscure, Kenneth Branagh presents a very different but equally revealing model of power. His Hamlet is structured by display. Mirrors, chandeliers, military choreography generate a world of dazzling visibility. Branagh restores the full text, including the Fortinbras material, and in doing so, situates Shakespeare's tragedy within a much more expansive political field. However, visibility in this film does not abolish secrecy. On the contrary, it multiplies it. Public exposure becomes one of the very instruments through which power legitimizes itself. This is where Branagh's adaptation becomes particularly illuminating for contemporary international politics. Modern authority, frequently, depends not only on bureaucratic control, but also on the management of a spectacle. Political strength is staged through ceremony and the orchestration of public effects. Branagh's Denmark is therefore not simply a court of display, it is a regime that understands performance as a condition of sovereignty. The polished surfaces of the film are disciplined production of visibility. The conceptual center of this paper lies in the figure of the ghost. To read the apparition only as a supernatural event or a stimulus for Hamlet's revenge is to miss its broader political significance. The ghost functions as the return of violated history. he transforms what the regime would keep buried into an imperative of memory and judgment. In doing so, he unsettles the temporal logic on which illegitimate sovereignty depends. Claudius' authority requires the past to remain closed. The ghost reopens it. Such a reading also clarifies the figure's contemporary relevance. Present-day politics is saturated with struggles over memory, over who has the authority to narrate the past, which injuries deserve recognition, and how historical violence is translated into present claims. The politics of memory can be emancipatory, but it can also be instrumentalized. Brannag's adaptation is especially alert to this tension, though it is latent in Olivier as well. In both films, the ghosts insist that unresolved violence cannot simply be administratively buried. The past returns, sometimes as mourning, sometimes as accusation, and sometimes as a force capable of destabilizing the institutions that have sought to contain it. Hamlet endures because it understands that the deepest crises of political power do not always begin with visible collapse. They begin when authority becomes estranged from legitimacy, when public language can no longer securely mediate truth, and when the violence and the rights order returns in forms that institutions cannot easily master. Read through the Gothic, Shakespeare's play becomes a drama of haunted sovereignty in which concealed origins and a spectral return form the basis of political analysis rather than decorative atmosphere. The two films' adaptations examined here give the analysis distinct cinematic bodies. Olivier imagines illegitimate rule as opacity. Branagh imagines it as a spectacle and a ceremonial performance of authority. Far from cancelling each other, these models reveal two complementary phases of modern political crisis. Power may protect itself by hiding, or it may protect itself by overexposing itself through display. In both cases, legitimacy remains fragile when it depends on the suppression of historical truth. The Ghost finally names what both the play and its adaptations know with exceptional clarity, that politics is never free of memory. Where injustice has been buried rather than confronted, the past does not disappear. It returns to challenge the narratives through which authority sustains itself. For that reason, Hamlet remains indispensable, but also to any serious reflection on the political cultures of the present, and not only to Shakespeare's status or film criticism. Thank you very much.